Okay, thank you everybody for being here today. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be here with us and learn more about an incredibly important topic. We know all of you are busy and again, appreciate you being here. Today, we have a wonderful presentation for you on diversity and inclusion in the workplace, an update on customer inclusions and setting a new path forward. As everybody is well aware, in this ever-evolving time, more evolving than ever, quite frankly, in the last year and a half than maybe the last 2 decades, figuring out how to address diversity and inclusion is difficult. It's complex, it's difficult. There's a lot of different feelings about it. So there's no one size fits all answer. And each company, as you all know, representing your companies are different and unique, and so are your employees. So Fidelity and Jamal are here today to tell us what they're hearing from their clients, which are all employers just like yourself, as unique as yourself. And they're going to talk to us today about how their research is shaping and evolving the strategy, not only for Fidelity as a company, but for their clients. And why that's important is because Fidelity is the largest record keeper in the world, right? They're the largest 401k provider in the world. And I don't say that to brag, hey, Fidelity is the largest. Look, they're presenting today. The reason that's important is because of the data they have. They have just about 22 million participants that they service, and they have all the behavior and trends and actions from those participants. They have that data. So not only are they able to see what people are saying, but they actually are able to see what people are doing and the actions that they're taking and their behavior when it comes to financial decisions, across all spectrums. So that data is priceless. And the programs, the resources, and the tools that they build, and then the advice and just sort of guidance that they provide to all us is also priceless, because having that data, having that behavior is very important, which is why they're here today. Now, today we have Jamal Stockton from Fidelity. He is steering that ship at Fidelity. He's a senior vice president of customer inclusion at Fidelity Investments, and he's really charged with leading a focused diversity and inclusion effort for unrepresented and underrepresented communities. He works to build and execute plans, not just to talk and present, but to actually execute on what's important and create higher engagement and better outcomes for the diverse customer base through enhanced experiences, product services, and then while influencing enterprise-wide practices and effectively engaging diverse communities, right? Again, engaging, not just talking. And that's what he is just incredible at. He's been in the business 20 years developing business strategies, process engineering, platform design, and implementation. And then what we like to call innovation evangelism, right? Creating these new programs, sources, resources through legal, through financial services, manufacturing, and he donates a lot of his time as well to many nonprofits. In particular, he sits on the board of students of Granada and is particularly passionate, clearly, about equity and equality in financial, legal, and healthcare services. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the presentation to Jamal. Thank you, Jamal, for being here and presenting to us. And again, if you have any questions, please type them through the chat function. I'm sorry, the question function, and we'll get those at the end. Jamal, you might be on mute, or let me see if that is on my end.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Gotcha. Sorry about that. That was my fault.
It's no problem. Thanks for the warm introduction. And just to make sure, can you see my screen okay?
Perfect.
All right, excellent. So as you stated, my name is Jamal Stockton, and I run our customer inclusion team here at Fidelity Investments. And I want to walk you through essentially what programs we have going on to really help with underserved and underrepresented customers and communities, but also a little bit about what we're doing internally with our own D&I programs. I won't spend that much time on our internal D&I programs. If folks do have questions, please let me know. But we do have an enterprise-wide diversity and inclusion program that is run by Wendy John. That's an enterprise-wide effort that really focuses in on our talent, our culture. We talk about things like inclusive language across the firm, and really making sure that every employee at Fidelity understands the importance of diversity and inclusion. And so that is a peer of mine, Wendy John, that manages that internal program. My efforts really in my mandate are focused on customer inclusion, and really that means representing the 30 million plus plan participants that are out there. And in addition to that, thinking about inclusivity in our retail business as well. So I also sit in an enterprise role focusing on inclusion for all of our customers. We also have another group that focuses in on diversity and inclusion that's more specialized in our workplace consulting group, helping our plan sponsors and clients thinking about their own internal D&I strategies on helping our clients get to better outcomes for their employees based on a consulting offering that we have. And if my colleague Eliza can join today, she'll speak about that. But I'm going to focus in on what my team does, which is really about customer inclusion. So this is the team that we've hired. This is not all of the folks that we've hired this year, but we've hired roughly about 28 associates in 2021 to focus on nothing but customer inclusion around the organization. And the way that we structure our team is really thinking about, well, what does inclusivity mean? And who might have been underrepresented or underserved in the past. And each of these individuals represents one of those segments. I'll also note here that 86% of the country identifies as being in one of these underrepresented groups. And so we think about my different leaders here. They represent the Black and African American segment. They represent Latinos and Latinas. They represent people that are in the accessibility community or that have a disability challenge. We also represent the veterans community and the LGBTQ+ community. And so our team is really structured around these different communities that we're trying to serve, while other folks that report into me sit in our other functions, thinking about how we market, how we advertise, all the data that we're collecting about our customers, and understanding the behavioral science that was previously mentioned about how people engage in their benefits. And so we have a lot of folks dedicated to customer experience, customer inclusion, because we understand that this is a business imperative for Fidelity. And one of the primary reasons why is that we understand that the demographic of the country is changing. So our recent studies will show that across different racial and ethnic groups, you have decreases in the white population in the United States over the next 40 years in the tune of 30 to 40%, and increases in other populations at the rates between 20 to 40% in the Latino and Latina segment, or the Black and African American segment, as well as Asian and Pacific Islander, and so on. And so from us, that means our customers are changing, and we need to better understand the needs, the values, and identities of those customers and how our products and services align to them. And so that's why it's a business imperative, right? It's the right thing to do, of course, to serve all of our customers, but as your customer demographic changes, Fidelity needs to change with it. And so this is a mandate from our chairman, Abby Johnson, where we have discussions about how to be more inclusive of all those different segments that I just mentioned. So then the question becomes, well, how do we do that, right? And so I've been focused on Fidelity's strategy for how we actually meet the needs of these different customer segments. And we use a framework which we call Welcome Me, Know Me, and Help Me. And this really means meeting people where they are. And so when you're trying to welcome someone, we're trying to understand the individual cultures that exist across Fidelity and how values change within those cultures about people's priorities. And so I'll give you a good example of what we mean by that. So sometimes when we're talking to the Latino community, we understand that it's not retirement that's always a priority for them, that they actually over-index and value health and welfare benefits more than they think about retirement. So should we be talking to them about the benefits of HSAs before we're talking about the benefits of IRAs and or our 401k products? And so having those cultural understandings is extremely important. So welcoming people by understanding where they come from, what matters to them most, and getting to know them as part of that process, and then aligning our products and services based on what those cultural values and needs are. And so that's just how we're thinking about everything in terms of servicing our customers. How do we welcome them, get to know them, and eventually help them based on what their priority needs are, based on their values, their needs, and their identity. So what does this mean ultimately that we're trying to accomplish? And this is a challenge. And so here at the beginning, as part of the introduction, we talked a lot there about the fact that Fidelity is one of the largest record keepers for 401k, certainly in the country, and that the challenge here around data is that we have lots of data around our benefits. We have lots of data around our existing customers, but we do have a hole in our data, like many others, around people's race and ethnicity and gender identity data. It's because we haven't collected it, because we had no reason to collect it before, because it wasn't trying to drive us to some sort of outcome or conclusion that we were trying to reach. Now that we're trying to better understand the different demographic groups, we understand that we've got to fill that hole. We've got to understand from a baseline perspective, where are the different demographic groups in terms of utilizing the products and services that we offer in our benefits, and how well are they doing against their peers? And so we're really trying to focus pretty heavily right now on getting to a baseline understanding to just increase enrollment and engagement, and thinking about the savings rates in our products and services based on those different demographic groups, to get all employees, all participants and customers to a better sense of financial wellness and financial freedom, regardless of where they sit within their communities. And so a heavy focus on engagement and enrollment, but most importantly, just getting to a baseline understanding of the different demographic groups and different gender identities. When it comes to gender identity, we've got challenges there, because we've always captured traditional gender identity data when you think about male and female, and now we have a greater understanding of the way in which people identify with themselves, binary, non-binary, and so on. And so we need to be able to accommodate for all the ways in which people identify with themselves, to get to a better understanding of all of our customers' needs. Ultimately, for us, that means we're trying to increase the satisfaction of all of our customers and participants in making sure that they have great financial wellness. And lastly, when we think about the community, this is particularly important to us and me, is that we want to be authentic, right? We don't want to just show up and not listen to what our customers have to say when we say meet people where they are. So really understanding and working with partners in the community through our community relations group, but also through other strategic sponsorships to better understand specifically what are the needs within the community, so that we can be the financial services provider of choice when it comes to diverse customer base. So that is our focus in this year, moving into next year. This is new to Fidelity. I've been in this role for about 9 years, but as previously stated, I'm a longtime Fidelity employee, been here for over 15 years, focused on this type of innovation work. So the areas for focus in terms of execution, you can see here at the bottom. So what are we trying to do internally at Fidelity to make those experiences better for all of our customers? So first is customer experience and engagement. And so some of our customer experiences are broken, and I'll talk about a couple of those when we think about inclusivity. So just yesterday, someone tweeted about a bad experience where they called in to sign up for a new account, and a customer in our phone contact center asked who their husband was and if they could utilize that person's last name to sign them up for an account. Well, this person was from the LGBTQ community. She didn't have a husband. She had a partner who was female. And so that's a bad interaction. And that's something that we didn't understand, or we're not coaching people maybe in our phone contact centers to deal with that particular person's values, right? Their identities, and how they think of themselves, and making sure that we're accommodating and being inclusive of those experiences. So customer experience and engagement is huge, both in our contact centers when we do planning and advice, and absolutely in our digital experiences when we think about how people engage with Fidelity. Now, that also means, secondly here, that awareness and training is also critical so that the folks that deal with our customers understand how to be inclusive and that they understand other people's cultures and what those needs are. And so internally, working with our Chief Diversity Officer, we're focused on training and awareness around people's cultures and needs with anyone that's a customer-facing associate, but really for all employees at Fidelity. They will go through this training and or are already starting to go through those trainings this year. Data collection and insights, I mentioned this already. We're currently working on a pilot program with select plan sponsors where we're trying to collect their demographic data and also host a series of focus groups with the plan sponsor ERGs to better understand what is working with our benefits, what is not working with the benefits, what are people's emotional sentiments about them, and truly to understand people's culture. Combining that qualitative data with the quantitative data that we already have as a primary record keeper to better understand how to drive people towards better financial wellness. So data collection and insights, we're really good at that, but we're looking to enrich the existing data and make it more robust. Business planning and strategic sponsorships, as I mentioned here, this is really about getting to know the community by working with other partners that are trusted within these communities. And that's about us better understanding life events and lived experiences within these communities, and ultimately the best practices that we need to instill in our own products and services. Financial education is another big area where we're seeing gaps and we're seeing people not kind of achieving or getting over that barrier of entry around just general financial literacy. So what we found is that it's too jargon heavy for people. A lot of the terminology that's used is jargon used in the financial services industry or is based on legislation. Just saying things like 529 accounts or 401k accounts, that's legislation that was written, but doesn't talk about what the outcome is of the product or service that we're actually serving to our customers. So the financial jargon needs to be simplified and speak to people in much more fragmented ways in terms of on-demand learning, as opposed to the older method of learning where we might publish white papers or lengthy insights around financial advice. And so we're hearing themes that going to public sources of information is oftentimes where people want to go. They're going to blogs like Reddit. Some users, especially the younger generation, are going to places like TikTok or YouTube or Instagram or Clubhouse to get their financial education and literacy. And so we're revamping our strategies, rethinking the best way to deliver that to make sure that there's not a barrier to entry to financial education. And then lastly, those products and services, making sure that we don't have any gaps in terms of the needs across the different communities. Recently, we launched youth accounts, right? And that's one way to fill a gap around financial education and literacy, getting younger people to invest much earlier on in their financial journeys. And so we're taking a holistic look at all the products and services that we offer and figuring out new ways to get out there into the community to best serve those up, but then also thinking about areas where we may have gaps. And I'll quickly pause here. I did throw a lot out. I don't know if there's any Q&A we want to jump in here. I can also wait until the end if there's any questions, but I'll pause for a moment if folks have questions thus far.
While we're waiting, Jamal, if the presentation is showing kind of in the PowerPoint, is there any way to make it full screen? We've had a couple of questions about that.
Sure, yeah, let me know if that works.
Let's see. You know, it's cut off a little bit, so maybe the other way was better. That was fine.
Yeah, I have a ultra wide monitor, and so sometimes it doesn't display.
No
Good
worries.
for me. It's great for full screen mode. How's this? Better.
Yep, that's better than when it was cut off. So we'll just stick with that. And I don't have any questions coming through the question function yet, so we can keep moving forward.
Great. So this is really how we plan to drive those major initiatives forward on behalf of our customers. So some changes that we're making early on and thinking about welcoming people is just the table stakes around language translation. We have broken experiences right now where you can start a transaction in Spanish and then it gets broken up and you're sent over to English and then back to Spanish. And so we understand the need for the diverse customer base and segments and communities out there that we need multiple languages. And that's something that we're working on in terms of our contact centers, but also our online experiences. I already mentioned cultural competence training and modules. That's really internal for the Fidelity associates to get a better understanding of our diverse segments. We recently kicked off our pilot program, Genesis, that I mentioned around planning or capturing data around the different demographic groups. We're about halfway through that pilot program. And these are insights that we're going to provide for free back to those people that sign up for this particular program, where we can start to move the needle for all their employees. And we hope to wrap this up by the end of the fall. Gender data strategy, this has to do with, again, different gender identities and making sure that we're able to capture those on behalf of our clients to make sure that, again, it's not just male or female or other, but that we're capturing all identities. Now, that type of data, if you're curious, becomes very important. I'll give you some examples here. If you think about things like planning and advice, well, people that might identify as transgender, for instance, don't have the same life expectancy as people that identify as male or female. So when you're having planning and guidance conversations with that type of customer, you need to be able to accommodate for the actual life expectancy that those individuals have within that community. That's why gender data might become important. It also becomes important because we don't want people to get caught up in our fraud detection systems. Someone that might be also going through hormone therapy, their voice changes. So we have voice authentication when they're going through that process. If your voice changes, what you started with might not actually be what you end up with. And so your actual initial voice might get caught up in our fraud detection system, just like you might get caught up in it through our chosen name versus given name, as people in this community often have a chosen name that they go by versus their given name. And so there's all sorts of use cases and experiences that have implications if we don't do these things right. I'll talk a little bit more here about our sponsorships and how we're working across the different communities out there on the next slide. And then a couple of other examples here. We are definitely thinking about all of our accessibility tools. If you think about the disability community, making sure that all of Fidelity's digital experiences are up to code with our A11Y standards, which is an international standard for accessibility. And so that's an area where we're spending a lot of time and resources to make sure that anyone with a disability, either now, and most people will end up with a disability in their life, if you think about changes to your eyesight, or as you get need elder care, you may not start out with a disability, but a lot of individuals throughout the course of their life end up with a disability. And so that's very important that our standards meet the needs of all of our customers now, or how our customers' needs change in the future. And so these are just some examples of the things that we're doing to move the needle forward, to be inclusive of all of our customers. So I'm just going to give you a couple of more examples here of how we're being inclusive. And in our Black segment, as we identify the different needs, and the needs change across the different segments and the different communities, where we're spending some of our time. And so first off, when you think about the Black community, we're trying to get to young investors much earlier on. And so we have a heavy focus here on youth accounts and making sure, as I mentioned previously, that people understand the power of investing much younger, and then how they do that on a brokerage platform, getting to start to trade stocks and so on. We're also working with a group of young individuals who have started their own financial education and literacy campaigns, working with young Black girls across the country. And they do all of this through social media. So we use that as a learning exercise for us for a particular market that we quite haven't tapped into yet. Within the Latina segment, again, Spanish translation and dedicated Spanish teams that can help with planning advice and guidance will be critical as, again, the country starts to shift in terms of its demographic. We want to make sure that we're getting that right. Gender data, I talked about this already, so I won't hit on that again, but we have a lot going on in the LGBTQ+ community. And then I also mentioned those standards in the accessibility community, and that's something that we've been focused on pretty heavily, those A11Y standards. And then we have a whole bunch of foundational work that I already mentioned, focused on that pilot that we call Genesis to get that quantitative and qualitative data from our plan sponsors, focusing heavily on financial education, cultural awareness, and then eventually holding workshops based on our learnings with different ERG groups, and of course, all of our plan sponsors and clients that are out there. We hope to hold these workshops in the future based on all the learnings that we've gotten from this year about how to move the needle forward across these different demographic groups. And lastly here, I want to talk about what the workplace consulting group does that's a little bit different than what my team is focused on. So my team is really to focus on all customers, regardless of where they sit. But if we're looking for, we have clients or plan sponsors that need more advanced advice, or they want a deeper learning and understanding, we've always got our workplace consulting group. And so they do deep analytics on the DNI data that may be internal to our clients or plan sponsors. Well, they'll look at the demographic data and understand the existing programs, internal DNI programs that our plan sponsors have, and consult on that. Then we build out dashboards, DNI dashboards that really help target education, focus areas, topics for ERGs, and cultural awareness that needs to be delivered to each of our plan sponsors or clients' employees. We also do a lot of work in pay equity. So if you're thinking about the gender pay gap or the pay gap across different racial and ethnic groups, we offer a lot of experience in that area as well. And so this is to really take what our team is doing to the next level, to focus in on and provide more advanced advice and guidance around internal DNI programs and benefits. And so our workplace consulting group is always available to offer up this advanced consulting as well. So that's the highlights of the things that we've been doing in 2021. Again, we're about 9 months into our journey focused on diverse segments. I will mention that we've been heavily focused on women's investors work and young investors work for the last 5 to 7 years. And so we also have a lot of insights on what's going on with women's or young investors, which does not fall under the scope of my work. But if people are interested in that, we can always get you information around what's going on with women and young investors. And so I'll end there and open up the discussion for any questions about what Fidelity is doing internally to focus on customer inclusion.
Thank you, Jamal. And if you have a question, go ahead and send it through the questions function, and I'll go ahead and ask it. To Jamal, I will not state your name. So if you were wanting to make it anonymous, that works as well. And as we're waiting for a question, Jamal, I have a question. How does Fidelity, and if this even exists, and if it doesn't, then even better, but how does Fidelity deal with pushback, right? So if you think about, diversity and inclusion, it's obviously more front and center than it ever has been. It's always been around, right? Needing to have that. But do you have any employees or any customers who are like, no, we don't want that. This is too much. And if so, do you educate them? How do you engage, maybe some employees or customers that are pushing back on DNI, if there is any?
Yeah, so I would say 2 different answers to that question. So if it's my team's work, I've spent the last 9 months sitting on over 100 client meetings, listening to what their needs were, and this is them coming to us. So I can't tell you one instance where a client has come to us and pushed back to say that they don't want the best financial well-being for all of their employees. That's not happening. The sentiment is exactly the opposite. They're saying we're not doing enough. We can see in our own information that we need to do better. and they're coming to us to say, well, how you, Fidelity, can help us. And so that sentiment is pretty powerful, to the point where I've got people on the phone that are, they're tearing up because they understand that there's a need for this. They understand it's long overdue, and that we've all got to do something together to solve for these problems. So I don't really get that on my side of the fence. Now, you may get challenges when you think about our internal programs and about talent. In the same way, I think a lot of you could probably understand when you start to focus on one group, the other groups feel like they're being left out. And I think that's just the nature of really human nature, right? And so we do get pushback, and I can't speak to specific examples, but our chief diversity officer certainly gets pushback when we're focusing heavily on one group versus the other. And the goal to be inclusive of everybody, you're looking at the people that are most underrepresented and trying to get them to be equal with everybody else. And as part of that process, ultimately, someone's going to feel like they're being left out. We, at Fidelity, try to represent every protected class to the best of our ability, not only because we're required to by law, but because we understand it's the right thing to do, and we get to better business outcomes when we do so. And so, again, I can't speak to the specific examples there, but generally that's where you're going to find the pushback, I think, is within your own employee base, and we consult on, how to address those issues. But again, that's outside my wheelhouse. That's something that our chief diversity officer deals with.
Okay, thank you. Another question came through. What is Fidelity doing regarding specifically educating employees and customers on disability abilities? So those customers and employees who have a disability, and is there any education specifically around that?
There is. And so if you're thinking about, one, just hiring people that have accessibility or disability needs, we're always trying to accommodate those individuals by giving the tools that they need to do their job. So as part of my group, we run the Office of Customer Accessibility, which deals with everything from procurement and vendor accessibility reviews to those international standards I talked about A11Y, with all of our platform and digital experiences being up to standard so that anyone with a disability can actually access things like net benefits or fidelity.com, any of our tools, and on our mobile devices as well. So we focus pretty heavily internally on accessibility and disability needs, even in our physical locations, the tools that people need outside of the office, even when they're traveling, to navigate, to make sure that they can get to where they're going. And so we do a lot of training and immersion sessions around accessibility needs, and are pretty darn good at it, to be honest with you. And it's something that I'm pretty proud that our Office of Customer Accessibility has done a great job with.
Okay, thank you. Another question that came through, what are Fidelity's D&I goals? Specifically more, how do you measure the success with the goals that are set? So how do you set the goals? What are they? And then how do you measure that success?
Yeah, so another great question. So again, I'll leave the enterprise-wide effort. So if you think about performance management, and some organizations will set targets for talent, I can't speak to those things. That's not within my scope of work. But if you're thinking about our customers and setting success metrics and targets there, I can speak to that. So when we're thinking about customers, the very first thing that we're trying to do this year as part of that pilot program that I mentioned was getting to a baseline for all of our participants and an understanding of all the folks that are out there in terms of our retail customers, which means that we need to know who they are. So what we're looking at are things like income levels. We're looking at things like tenure, native language spoken, to better understand how these different demographic groups align to things like our savings rates, our enrollment rates, our engagement. So we're setting pretty basic, I would say, metrics and KPIs for the next year and a half that are focused on those three simple areas of enrollment, engagement, and savings, starting with enrollment, because what we understand is that there are a lot of people that simply aren't enrolled in some of these diverse segments. And so first you got to get them there. Once you get them enrolled, then you can talk about how to get them more engaged on a regular basis. and then ultimately begin to increase their savings rates across the different benefits or just utilizing more of their benefits. And so that is very hard to do. There's no report out there that says this is how well people are doing. We have general understandings of how the country is doing across different racial and ethnic groups and those other dimensions of intersectionality, like if someone's a veteran or if someone's in the LGBTQ community, but you've got to get to a baseline before you can begin to measure. And that's what we're in the middle of doing right now. And some of the initial data is actually proving to be very insightful.
Okay, great answer, thank you. What do you suggest doing when dealing with quote unquote old school management mentality, when approaching D&I, just generally speaking? And I guess maybe that's similar to the first question we asked, like, how do you address that?
Yeah, so facts, number one. So we released our internal D&I report, which went public, where we talked about the discrepancy across the different demographic groups, whether that was gender, right, or different racial and ethnic groups, just to show people at Fidelity who may have not believed that there is a disparity, that there actually is a disparity. So the numbers are startling. And so you've got to start with facts, which I would call facts for change, which is if you don't believe something, present people with the truth through facts. Then if you choose not to agree, that's a different type of discussion. And so that's management. Ultimately, I think a lot of organizations will focus on attrition over time as the culture changes. And so this is where our D&I office is heavily focused on culture and talent, and what the new talent we need, the skill sets that we need versus what some of our older talent and managerial mindsets might be working today. And so again, that's not an area that I specifically weigh in on, but I know that we have heavy focus on thinking about, okay, these are the old mindsets from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, what have you, versus this is the way that our country is changing, the way that the demographic is changing, the way that we think about society, and the mindsets and skills that we need in order to make Fidelity a company of the future.
Okay, thank you. Question, comment here that came through. What does diversity and inclusion have to do with your business? And further kind of explanation, your product offerings should resonate with anyone who wants to invest and save, regardless of gender, race, mental or vocal stability, etc. And so the question that came through is that, what specifically does D&I have to do with your business, with Fidelity's business?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned kind of why it was a business imperative at the very beginning, which is just that the customer base is changing. And the way that we communicate today does not resonate with the new customers of the future, nor of some of our existing customer base. And when you think about welcoming somebody, this could be everything from the language that we use to being open-minded in the conversations that we have, to understanding the different kind of cultural events that happen within a given community. Let's we'll use another example. So when we talk about family planning, you might think about opposite sex couples planning for a family. And I said, say you're someone that's a Latina, but that's in a same sex marriage, that you're not having the same conversation because you're trying to navigate the different legal issues across different states that allow for someone to have a family or even to be legally married. And your planning around that and your finances around that are going to change based on maybe the community that you're in, or if there's some sort of legal issues that you need to deal with based on your given identity, your lifestyle, and what your cultural needs are. And so it's oftentimes not that we don't have the product, it's that we don't welcome people and know them differently than we know our existing customer base, so that we can ultimately help them with the products that we already have. So that's a huge thing. And sometimes there's just products that we don't have that a lot of, I think, new fintech startups and certainly banking institutions are trying to help resolve with. And not to say that we're going to come out with them, but what you're seeing happen in the industry to try to close some of the gender gap or even the racial wealth gap is that people are trying to help with things like payday loans. Or they're coming out with better credit building products, or they're helping people to try to rent to own because home prices have surged so much that it makes it very hard to own. So those are ways that people in the industry at large, I think, are trying to align new products to better help people that are underserved and underrepresented. For us, it's really the focus on those first two pieces of our framework about better welcoming people, having better conversations with folks, more open-minded conversations, and better understanding of people's needs. And so that's the difference for us. It's not necessarily about creating new products all the time. It's about having better planning and advice conversations, and certainly better communications to our customers.
Yep, that's a great point. Communication, learning how to communicate. Do you find customers hesitant to give you the information, the D&I information, because they are worried that it'll be used against them instead of better supporting them?
There's absolutely that concern. It's a great question, and it's something that we try to address up front. And so as part of our pilot program, we're disclosing how we're using it and the fact that we're actually going to purge that information after we collect it, right? So you always need to disclose why you're using it. And so that is something that we've done. And for clients that aren't comfortable with it, we're not making them part of this pilot program. We want everyone to be 100% comfortable with the fact that we're collecting this information for the purposes of gaining insights, and is something that's not going to be disclosed to any other client. People would see at scale, anonymized, right, and redacted, kind of how people are doing across different demographic groups, but nothing would ever be shared about individual customer, and certainly nothing would be shared about an individual client or plan sponsor that would be shared with anybody else. And so there's always a privacy concern, and that's always a top of mind for Fidelity as a huge record keeper, that information is confidential.
Okay, thank you. What would you say is the first or most important step? Sorry, the questions just popped up. What would you say is the first or most important step that one must take to begin implementing, a successful D&I program in the workplace?
Yeah, so again, if it's thinking about customer inclusion from a D&I perspective, the first thing there is just understanding what the customer's needs are. And that's where I spent most of my time, was building a strategy around listening to what our customers and clients were saying, where the gaps were, and then coming up with those primary initiatives based on what our customers were saying. So that really was around data, financial education, experiences, and so on. If you're talking about building D&I programs internally, go to your employees would be the first thing that I say. I'm not the chief diversity officer, but from my experience, what works really well is creating these ERG groups or focus groups where people can begin to network and understand some of the challenges that your own employees have within your own organization. So creating those groups, early on we created our women's ERG. And through those groups, a lot has changed internally about understanding the needs of people within our employee base that identify as being women, that we understand more what their needs are and how they were feeling about our benefits, the culture at Fidelity that has led to a tremendous amount of change. And so that's the first place that I would start, is by creating those focus groups at ERG groups or employee resource groups. Now, our chief diversity officer may have a different opinion based on her last year in her role, but that's where I've seen that Fidelity's had success.
Okay, perfect, thank you. So I think that answers the first part of the next question. What sort of baby steps can you take to implement this? And it's, hey, just create some focus groups and listen to what your employees are saying. It's probably the best place to get the information. Second part of the question is, are there any resources that can be used to bring in-house training, seminars, et cetera? If so, besides Fidelity, of course, do you know of any groups, or instead of just going to Google and finding it, is there a resource to sort of develop a program and bring in some knowledge?
So is the question that folks are looking for groups that can come in and train on how to build internal D&I programs? Is that the question?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So there's definitely resources that are available to help consult on D&I efforts. I mentioned Workplace Consulting, right? And I think they have built a program to help our clients build out internal D&I programs. Certainly there are folks that we've used in the past when we thought about our D&I programs. I can't speak to the specifics of who they were, but obviously there's lots of law firms out there that also specialize in this. So the previous question you're asking about how to get started, first is listening to your employees. The second thing is you're going to look at the data, and that's really where some of these law firms might come in and help you better understand where you have gaps from a legal perspective in your employee base, and then help you build programs around awareness, and certainly cultural awareness training and communications. And that's something that's not foreign to Fidelity either. And so if you're looking for specific groups, I can't disclose everybody that we've worked with, but there are businesses, law firms out there that specialize in this. And if you want to follow up with me after this question, if someone wants to contact me directly, I can help you specifically with that.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, that's all the questions that we have for today. So Jamal Stockton, thank you so much for the presentation, for the Q&A session. And if you'd like to get in touch with Jamal, go ahead and send me an email and I'll provide you his contact information. I appreciate everybody being here today and taking time out of your day to learn more about such an important part of all of our lives. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, phone number, email, right there on the screen. And would be happy to steer you in the right direction. Thanks so much, everybody, and take care. Thanks,
All right.
Jamal.
Okay, bye now.